Good evening, everybody. We look forward continuing tonight with Shariach V'Emunah, the segment that we're presently learning in Perek Zayin, which is the 7th chapter. The original text, which is on page Pei Beis, 6 lines from the top of the page. And we've mentioned many times Shariach V'Emunah is the second segment in the Sefer of Tanya. We merited to conclude the first Likutei Amarim and began a few months ago the Shariach V'Emunah, which we did take some time in the very beginning explaining, noting a few points of the significance of this segment. But very briefly, worth to re-mention again, Shariach V'Emunah literally means the gateway into oneness and faith. With Alter Rebbe, there's many reasons. There are reasons why the Alter Rebbe called this segment Shariach V'Emunah. Obviously, it's all about matters related to unity of Hashem, oneness of Hashem, faith, and so on. But just to look at it in a simple way, Shariach V'Emunah. Alter Rebbe pulled us into a gate, and in this gate, and when you enter into this gate of Yichud V'Emunah, the way it's presented by the Alter Rebbe, you will never come out the same. And it's a very bold and actual statement, because that's what it truly is. There's no ifs, buts. You go into the gate, enter into the gate of Shar, into the gate of Yichud V'Emunah, the way it's presented by the Alter Rebbe. Your whole appreciation in Emunas Hashem, appreciating the oneness Hashem, will never be the same. And we're lucky. We're literally zeicha that Hashem sent down a neshama like the Alter Rebbe that gave us a Tanya. We spoke about in the Likutei Amarim, to mention time and again, the perfect manual to living a life according to Torah mitzvahs. And on top of that, Shariach V'Emunah, the ability to appreciate HaKadosh Baruch Hu as something real, not only as a concept, and proclaiming Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and a shackle here and there, but much beyond that. And not only beyond that, it's a different idea. What resonates in the mind of the human being, particularly the Yid, via the Shariach V'Emunah, in ways that Elokus becomes, godliness becomes palpable. Faith in Hashem becomes a davar mukhshi, meaning to say that always obviously remains faith, because Hashem is transcendent of any level of rationale. So in the end of the day, it's always faith, but the faith becomes a very rich and clear and meaningful faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So entering this gate is extremely, extremely unique. And again, we're lucky that the Alter Rebbe, besides telling us how to be a Frume Yid, and obviously in Likutei Amarim there's a lot about Yichud and Emunah, but giving us this segment with these 12 chapters is something indeed revolutionary, which we're simply zeicha. We're able to enter into the gate of true oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and establish true, authentic faith, genuine faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Eibishter, Elokus, becomes a davar mukhshi, becomes something which is tangible and real. And so we're holding a Perek Zayin, which comes as a follow of a Perek Vav from Perek Daled. We did mention then Perek Hey is quite distinct. As you recall, we spoke about this when we learned it and in different times. What Alter Rebbe establishes in Perek Daled, this new phenomenon of another dimension within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We notice Chesed, there's the B'riyah Shmiyah, and again I'm using terminologies which we used and explained and articulated all these matters in those chapters in Perek Daled. And then there's the Gvura. Gvura is a different cap coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, it's one of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's midas. And we explain once HaKadosh Baruch Hu's midas, it's just another name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's all, ultimately, even though it does something that obscures the Emes Hashem, La'elam, but nonetheless, once we know it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, so it's not a real Helen Behester, Hashem or Elikim, as the Alter Rebbe concludes Perek Vav, especially from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we explain this all. We explain this in detail. And it's not even justified to even mention all this again, because today it's just a click away, literally a click away. Wherever you're watching this shir, it's always good to go to the original website. Besides, it's especially for newcomers, you have the opportunity to follow the class with the text. The text is at a separate scroll bar, and on top of that, you have the access to all the previous classes. So it's Perek Zayin. You learn Perek Zayin, or wherever you're learning Tanya, but you have the ability with a click away to know what we learned last week and the week before in this chapter. Today's the third chapter, third class on Perek Zayin, and in Perek Vav, the information of Perek Vav, an idea, the notion of Hashem Elokim. Perek Daled, which was based on an important question of Perek Gimel, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything and everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way the Alter Rebbe explains when you say everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not only Hashem is giving life and to a world, and as such in control and governing every detail within Elam Hazan, it's far beyond that. Or the Pasuk Alter Rebbe bases his whole theology over here of La'ilam Dvarcha Hashem Dvarcha Nimatzav Hashemayim. Hashem created the world with the Dvar Hashem, based on the Pasuk Dvar Hashem Shemayim Nasa, with speech. He spoke creation into being. We have the Mishnah Basar Mamoris Nivir Ha'ilam that attends saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu imbued into creation, or spoke it, and Nivir Ha'ilam, the world was created. And that it only didn't happen then. Chayim B'Kayam La'ad. The Hashem is constantly pumping this energy in creation. If Hashem ceases to pump this creation and energy into creation, creation would turn to nothing, literally would disappear. You see that stone, it looks like it's just there. No, Hashem is right now vitalizing it. If Hashem stops vitalizing it, it just disappears. It would disappear completely. And in other words, it wouldn't be like a broken stone, a fragment, it just disappears. So the whole chayis, the whole existence of the stone, is the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why doesn't the stone demonstrate that? That was the question that the Rebbe left off in Perek Gimel, and he introduces a whole new idea, that there's a cap called Gvura that camouflages, obscures that Emes Hashem, the Shem Havaya, which is extension of Chesed, and which is the B'riyah Shmiyai, the whole phenomenon of creating in a manner of ex nihilo. It's an extension of Chesed because it has infinity. It's an infinite expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No one could create something out of nothing. It just doesn't exist. Even when you throw a kernel into the ground, the kernel is that little something which eventually develops. Even though it's obviously from the place of Ma'aseh Bereishis that you could take a kernel. The wonders of creation, take a kernel, you have a whole bushel, but nonetheless you're always starting with something. True creation in a manner of ex nihilo is only b'chek habayre, literally transit in the bosom of the Creator. In other words, only the Creator can create in this manner. So it's an extension of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But then Hashem has that cap, which is Gvura, which doesn't allow the emes to appear the way it truly is. But again, very very briefly, look, you see, we're already taking too much time already. But in the end of the day, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Remember, we gave the example. You put yourself into a room because you have to study for an exam the next day, and you can sit there for 6 hours. You don't find yourself confined at all because you put yourself into the situation. And so too, it's part of Hashem's name. We explained this, the connection of this example, but on the surface, you see the similarity. Hashem, it's Hashem's name, which it's another character, it's another attribute of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's all part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So once it's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's really no confinement. The cover-up is not a real cover-up. And that's the only thing, is we have to uncover at least this external veneer, this appearance, to introduce Hashem, the truth of Shem Hashem into the world. Again, that's the Avodah of the Yid. But all this doesn't, but this begins with Gvura. And ultimately is manifested Malchus, which is the lowest sphera of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what the Alter Rebbe explains. It's the Malchus which has created the whole phenomenon of time and place. We gave the example. North of Malchus, let's call it. Over Malchus. There's no time. For that matter, Shem Havaya. We spoke about this as well. The Shem Havaya, what is embedded in the word, or the energy of the word Shem Havaya, or the message of the word Shem Havaya, is Hoya, Hoive, V'yeh Ke'echad, past, present, and future, like one. When it comes to Malchus, Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlech, right away you have the idea of past, present, and future. as the Eibishter becomes a melech, adoin kol haaretz, master over the earth, literally translated. Because from Malchus, because of the cap of Malchus, that's where you have the whole phenomenon of time and place, of creation. The Eilam, usually when you say the world is a combination of time and place. So this only begins from Malchus, and we explain the relationship of king and his subject, and they accept upon himself, they accept upon the king upon them. It is in the end of the day, he didn't create them. They submit themselves to him. When it comes to Hashem, his Malchus created the whole phenomenon of an Am. Remember, we learned this last week. Again, a click away in the original site. We always mention it, tanyaonline.com. Am is Miloshin Aimimnis, Gechalim is coals that have been extinguished. You don't see the energy and the fire of the coal, which is similar to Elam Haza. It's a world that doesn't demonstrate on its own the truth of what it truly is, which is Elokus. But that comes because of the energy of Gvura, which is manifest in Malchus. So the whole phenomenon of time and place begins by Malchus. Remember, we spoke about also when we say Hashem gave the Torah. And again, we mentioned this in detail, but again, we said Hashem gave the Torah. It's not like he knew it's going to be in 1,000 years to see if it's relevant. Or it's relevant today because Hashem knew what's going to be in 1,000 years because he has a dynamic eye which is able to navigate within seconds at 3,000 years. It's obviously not like that. The area where Torah comes from, there is no years. There are no years. The whole phenomenon of years is created by Malchus. There's no space. There's no time. There's no space, which is again the fabric or the combination or the presentation of Elam Haza. What Elam Haza is primarily time and place. That doesn't exist beyond Malchus. It's only via Malchus that all this exists. We gave an example last week, a few times. Last week we repeated it. The traffic light, you have the different colors, but sometimes you see when they repair the traffic light, they open up that box, swings open that door, so to say, where you have the green and the yellow and the red. Again, it's a simple, silly example, but you can see that they're all the same. It's all one bright color. But with that bright color, maybe it would be brighter at night especially, but it wouldn't send any message. The consequence would be chaos on the street. I mean, in the context of driving and so on. Walking, driving. So they have these caps on top of that same light bulb. One is green and one is red and so on. And these caps, they obscure the brightness. They cover up over the brightness. But nonetheless, there's some new phenomenon of messages coming through these lights. But from the bulb itself, it's very bright, and there's no message, there's no specific message. And there won't be specific, there it would be reflected on, disorder on the streets. And again, a silly example, but we can appreciate what he's saying over here is that higher than Malchus, Zman HaMakan doesn't exist. I think once a story with the tzaddik, the story, the Baal Shem Tov story of the Baal Shem Tov, the 14 years when he gave something to somebody to give it to the parnas of the city, one who looks after the communal needs, and he forgot about it, and then 14 years later, when he started losing his money, he had to go sell his clothes, and he remembered the letter. I mean, there's many, many details to the story, but the point is, he went to the parts of the city, and the letter read that this man standing in front of you was once a wealthy individual, and that was the time when he met the Baal Shem Tov. He was a very wealthy individual, and he supported the community. He supported even out of the community things which were dear to Torah and Yiddishkeit, or rather in the context dear to Am Yisrael, in the context in this which he was able to support. In the context of supporting Torah and Yiddishkeit. And when he gave out, Baal Shem Tov gave him the letter, he was a wealthy individual. But what happened was he forgot about it, and then when he started losing his fortune, and he had to sell his clothes, he went out to a closet and he tapped to remember the letter what the Baal Shem Tov gave him 14 years before. And he went to the Parnas, and Parnas opened up the letter. And then the Baal Shem Tov read, this individual standing in front of you has been once a wealthy individual. He lost all his money. And you knew when he had the money, he supported the community and other important institutions, mikvahs, shuls, and so on. And the community has to galvanize itself to help him out, him and his family, which is a mind-boggling story. Had he gave the letter then, it wouldn't not only would have been relevant, it would be something wrong. But whatever reason, and the Baal Shem Tov wasn't even alive then. It's there's a lot of details to the story. Baal Shem Tov even gave a sign that this is authentic and this is true. It's coming from me. And that if your wife is expecting any day, and today she's going to give birth to a girl, and as he was reading it, someone came in and told him the news that his wife just had a baby girl, which a bunch of things came together, and it's a mind-boggling story. So one would say, well, the Baal Shem Tov was able to see through so many years and orchestrate based on his greatness, the greatness of a tzaddik is, and part of the greatness of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, meaning to say, Moshe's Eved Hashem, Aminu B'Hashem, Moshe Avdi, because Moshe doesn't have any separate entity of his own. It's all an extension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Baal Shem Tov was able to navigate these 14 years and just orchestrate that he shouldn't open the letter and he shouldn't give it in the right time. Whatever, we can try to translate the letter, but it's so much deeper than that. In the area where a tzaddik is privileged to be, meaning to say because of his piety, because of his greatness, he has and he lives the Shem Hashem. Spoke about this idea that tzaddik tells someone to check his mezuzah across the Atlantic. It's not that he's able to navigate those thousands of miles and to see what's going on in this individual's mezuzah. Yeah, it's puzzle, it needs to be kosher, kasher. No, he's just in a level in the spirit, on the level and in the spirit of Shem Havai, where there is no time and place, and it doesn't exist. It just begins south of Malchus, or Malchus creates the whole phenomenon of time and place. Beyond that, there's no time and place. Now, can we understand what it means, a situation of no time and place? We can't thoroughly appreciate it because we're in part and parcel of Eilam, which is time and place. But we should know that we have part of our neshama. We know there's 5 levels of the neshama, Chamisha Shemus Nikrula, and there's part of the neshama which is associated with time, place, space, which is the inferior part of the neshama. But within our neshama, we have a part of the neshama which is connected to Shem Havai. Ki chelek havaya ame. Yid is a chelek lekami mal mamash. So there's something that in our conscious mind we can somewhat appreciate this, that Hashem is transcendent of time and place. The Rebbe has an expression, L'Kutei Torah, that a yid, a kosher yid, when just the fact that in his brain and he ponders on this, that the whole phenomenon of time and place comes from Malchus, at the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or higher than Malchus. It doesn't exist. The Rebbe says he melts away with bitter tears that he finds himself confined in the area of time and place, knowing that just behind the curtain it doesn't exist, and therefore he aspires with a Kleis HaNefesh, the outpour of the soul, to be part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is beyond these limitations. Even holy time and space, governed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's already a limitation. This all exists from Malchus. Beyond Malchus, it doesn't exist. So here, this is what the Alter Rebbe tells us: all these different levels of time and space don't exist in the supreme holy midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, only within the midah, that last attribute of HaKadosh Baruch Hu called Malchus, there shaykh lemer, there you can say that he's a king to the highest levels and to the lowest levels, and to all 4 corners, levels higher than Malchus, doesn't exist at all. And that's in the context of space, in the context of time. Zman. What does the pasuk say? Hashem melech, Hashem molech, Hashem yimlech. Hashem reign, present, past, present, and future. But that's only because it's the phenomenon of Malchus where creates the phenomenon of time. Therefore, you can say, yeah, he is the one who reigns in the past, present, and future. Even after he created Malchus, he is the one who is Molech. He governs. He rules in all segments of time. But that statement, he rules in all segments of time, the past, present, and future, doesn't exist prior to Malchus. Shem Havaya is Haya Heviviyah Ke'echad, past, present, future, and future are one. It's not divided. And that's what he said. And again, what word do you see? Melech, Malach, Himlech, because that's associated with the attribute of Malchus. Nimtza. ונמצא שחייס המוקים וכן חייס הזמן ויסבוס הבית מיש וקיומם כל זמן קיומם הוא מימידס מלכוס יתברך. The energy of space and the energy of time and their being created from a state of nothing to a state of something, which means them being created, obviously it's from the state of nothing, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nothing in the context that, in other words, there was no existence before this time and space, from a state of Ayin to a state of Yesh. Vikiyumam, and their existence, as long as they exist, comes to Midas Malchus Yisbarach, only from the Midah Malchus HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Meshimadnus Baruch Hu, and the name Adnus, that Hashem becomes Adoin Kol Haaretz. As we explained last week, when you have a king-subject relationship, the king didn't create the whole subject, which is a Am, separate, not from the inner circle of the king. His ministers, his children know, a nation which is separate, Gecholim Amimis, as we explained before, which that's the perfect king-subject relationship. It's precisely when it's an Am, as we explained last week. But with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he created this whole phenomenon of Am. Am meaning to say a area which is devoid of the authenticity of Elokus, of godliness, which transcends time and place. And this is the point that the Alter Rebbe says he becomes bitter and he starts crying because he feels time and space, because he knows that's a creation, that's a removal from the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the Achdus, the way it is in Shem Havaya, which we called it, we had 2 weeks ago in the class, the first class in Perek Zayin, Yichudi Lo, the supreme oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he'd rather be part of the supreme oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that's closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the ambiance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way he's for himself by himself. The whole idea of time and place, even abiding or appreciating Hashem's governing time and place, which extracts a clear subjugation and submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, subservience and submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way Hashem created time and place, and that level, that inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, draws as well awe and fear by the Yid, because Hashem is the only Melech. There's no other Melech. But in the end, that's Yichud Tata, the inferior oneness, because it's part of the inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Malchus, which creates the whole phenomenon of time and space. But it doesn't exist in Shem Havaya. So Shem Havaya is the inner spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, the way that Hashem is for himself by himself, beyond Midas of Malchus. And there's no time, there's no space, and there is nothing can really exist. Nothing in the spirit of finitude could exist in the face of the infinite. But Yetzim, that's where a Yid really wants to be. He gave the example, the fire always wants to be part of its source, even though there it would lose its entity as a particular flame. That's what it says, Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam, which is the neshama of the Yid, always wants to be part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not interested in time and place because it knows that's already an inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It created time and place. It wants to be part of the brightness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which transcends time and place. The whole story of another Avihu gives us perspective, what really happened there. So he says, V'shem Adnas Baruch Hu, there's an Aretz, Nevish to be Kashem, becomes Adein Kol Ha'aretz. But again, that's the lowest, is all an expression of the lowest sphere, lowest midah, lowest attribute of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to come and say, because the midah Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is essentially one with the ultimate oneness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like we're going to explain. Therefore, time and place is in essence completely annulled, stands in total 100% nullification in the face of the etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To what degree? Which the Alter Rebbe introduces in the 3rd chapter. And what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here, okay, so it's 2 expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One creates Malchus, Man, Makim, the world where we know it. And then one is behind. In other words, behind, higher than Malchus, doesn't exist. But could I appreciate that level of higher than Malchus? Could Malchus ever, everything what Malchus creates, let's call it, everything what comes from Malchus, time and place, could they ever have an appreciation or even a connection to this level of Shem Havaya, which is higher than Malchus? Apparently not. Because, okay, if you're in your area, you know, in your domain, Hashem, obviously you're not limited to time and place because you stand higher than Midas Malchus, Midah of Malchus, your attribute of Malchus. So you stand higher than, again, the whole phenomenon of time and place, and you stand higher than Malchus. You're for yourself, by yourself. And this all doesn't exist. But in the end of the day, we are productions of Midas Malchus. In other words, with the Shem Adnos, synonymous with the Shem Malchus, created this whole phenomenon of time and place. And we're part of that. Because we see we're part of that. To us, there's a time, clicking, past, present, future, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 10 after 7, 10, 20 after 8. This is time. This is real to us because we are south of Malchus. We're a creation of Malchus. And so to place, there's here and there's there. So perhaps maybe there is a dissident between the spirit of Shem Havaya and Shem Elikim. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, it's not so. Because they're both expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So not only in my conscious mind can I appreciate a level which is higher than Shem Havaya, but beyond that, the whole Zman U'Makom, truly what it truly is that it's completely annulled, stands in 100% self-nullification in the face of Shem Havaya. And for that matter, you could find that, you could experience that. But why isn't there that disconnect between the two? If I'm a product of Malchus and Hashem, the way He's formed himself by Himself, is beyond Malchus, so why would they connect? Who causes that fusion? But the answer is, you need not to do something active to cause the fusion from its pure perspective, because Hashem Hu Elikim. We gave the example then when it comes to a master, a teacher, that he's giving over all this information to his student. So he has to contract and conceal this information the way he knows it for himself. We use the analogy of a Torah goyin, a prodigy in Torah, and he is given the mandate to learn with a child, somebody new to it, maybe in age or in stage. So he has to contract his great knowledge. Because if he's going to start learning the way he knows, the Gemara Hashatesh, the recipient would sit there for 4 weeks or 4 months or 40 years or 40 years, walk out the same way they came in. The master has to contract all his great knowledge and teaspoon the child a story, a parable, a metaphor, and try to start connecting the information with these veneers, so to say, with these examples, these metaphors, these stories, and eventually start opening up more and more of himself, that the child or the Talmud, the pupil, starts growing and growing on their own, till, like the Gemara says, about the man could reach even his master's intellect after 40 years, and it takes time. But this was strategized, step after step. Now, when the Rav, when he is saying a story, we did give this example already in the past quite a few times, but it's so relevant over here. When he's saying the story as an example, there is no dissonance between him, his knowledge, and his presentation now with a parable, metaphor, story, and so on. To say, no, he's now crossed over to being the teacher, and therefore he has to start with stories and metaphors. So he lost his greatness, at least for the 45 minutes. He's giving over the lesson to the child. And the biggest proof is, what does the child hear? The child hears a story. Child hears a metaphor. Child hears things which are he's familiar to him or her. But in those 45 minutes, to say, well, the master needed to wipe away, delete all his information because it was so strong and it was so powerful, and therefore he really had to delete it and try to find it in some backup program when he wants to go back at night to learn for himself, or after he gives over the lesson, he has to find in some backup data system within himself. But those 45 minutes, what are you talking about? Listen to what he's saying. He's talking simple stuff. Things which are inferior. Inferior meaning to say there's no profundity in his words. Particularly initially, when he sits down with a little child, a young child, and has to teach him things which are simple. But everybody understands that even when the master is giving over that parable, in his mind already he sees the depth, what stands behind that parable. Even he's giving over the story. We spoke about something. The Medrash has stories, wants to relate to us the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe Rabbeinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael. He says there was once a king, had a good friend, and then he had people and they sinned. Whatever, all the Mishalim, many Mishalim where the Medrash relates to us so beautifully and eloquently. And the Mashal and the Medrash would go on and explain, Moshe Rabbeinu is the good friend, and Hashem is the king is Hashem, and the people are Am Yisrael, and this is what happened, and so on and so forth. So when the Rav is saying, for example, this parable, in his mind, he says there was once a king. In his mind, once a king is referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the onset. When he says those words, there was once a king. And he had a good friend. To the master, it's already Moshe Rabbeinu. And so to everything he gives over at that very time when the presentation is so distinct and so different than the depth and breadth of his knowledge. At that very time, the depth and breadth of his knowledge is right there because it's one person. The way he's for himself, by himself, with a vast knowledge. And then that same person decided on his own that he's going to be a teacher. And he's going to go give over this information to someone who is less capable or someone who's just starting. It's his decision or her decision as a master. And it's the master's decision to give over this information to another party, especially somebody who's beginning. But because it's the same person, in the end of the day, there is no barriers between the way he's for himself and in his profound appreciation of all this knowledge that he acquires, all this knowledge that all this knowledge that he gained over so many years. His diligence, his assiduousness brought him to be this great Eloi, this great prodigy. So there's never an interruption because it's the same personality. It's the same person. And like we said, even when he says the word, there was once a king, in his mind it's already referring to Hashem in the examples, the classic examples of the Medrash. So too when you're talking about, and we once mentioned also, you have the right hand, the left hand. It's the right hand does something, left hand doesn't bother it because it's one organism. Or the example we gave, someone locks themselves up for 6 hours because they decided they needed that seclusion in order to study for a particular test, exam, and so on. There was nothing would block them from society, as opposed to someone takes someone else, another party, and puts them behind bars or in a cell for even 6 hours. There is incredible hysteria. Or enormous hysteria. Because someone else put you into that room. But if you put yourself into the room, you appreciate every minute being in seclusion because you're gaining the knowledge that you need for that next day's test, as an example. Because it's you. And if it's you, there's never a confinement. And so too when we talk about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem Hu Elikim, meaning to say it's not, okay, we know Hashem is beyond time and space. The area where Torah itself is coming from is beyond Shem Elikim, beyond Malchus. I know that I'm fine. There's Torah's from an area which is beyond time and place, and therefore I adhere to the word of Hashem 100%. But nonetheless, I'm a production of a different, from a different attribute of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I'm really part of the time and place, and to tell me about that supreme oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm just not there. But the truth is not so. Because in the end of the day, the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a cap Hashem himself put on with the energy of Gvura, as explained in Perek Daled, that creates ultimately Zman and Mokim. But because it's one organism, if you will, it's Hashem himself. So Hashem Hu Elikim. So when you look at Zman and Mokim is not real Zman and Mokim to say, oh, because it's created from Malchus, so it ought to be like that, and this is real. It ought to be stuck to the reality of time and place. No, not at all. Because this Malchus is coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And from Hashem's perspective, and the Hashem Havai, the Malchus is just a cap Hashem puts on. But it's the same Hashem. So everything which is produced from Malchus, time and place, is in essence one with the infinite energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why doesn't time and place disappear? So I'm going to ask the question, oh, why is it green, red, and yellow? Why don't I see the shine of the bulbs, which are the real light, which is actually making that green, yellow, and red be seen with my eye? The reason why it's shining, it's because of those bright bulbs. But why don't I see the bright bulbs? Why do I see that green? Because there's a cap of green, so you see really the bulb, but there on that bulb there's a green glass, and a red glass, and a yellow glass. And so too when we speak about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the reason why don't I see it that way? Because Hashem decided to put the glass on, green, yellow, or the Malchus. But it's coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shmei Echad. Hashem in his name, meaning to say, or Hashem, it's one organism, and because it's one organism, it's Hashem himself put that cloak, so to say, of Malchus, but because it's one HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the whole Malchus is really one with this, which is higher than Malchus, because it's one HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem Hu Elikim. And therefore, the entire production of Malchus, which is time and place, don't lock it in that it's just a matter of time, place, and it's completely disconnected from this, which is in the area which is transcendent of time and place. It's not so. You look at time and place, you say, yeah, the cap is on of Malchus, so there is time and place, but the whole time and place, not only the Malchus, but the production of Malchus, which is actually time and place, which comprises the phenomenon of Eilam, is really part of the Shem Havaya. And therefore, time and place appears to be time and place. With HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the decision, but it's not stuck into time and place. And this is what we see, the different meisim, the wonders which come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his Torah, through tzaddikim. What they do is they show you, yeah, this looks very real, but I will show you that it's not so real. And they point out a miracle here and a miracle. What's the point of the miracle? That what you see on the surface looks in a certain way, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to create it in that fashion. Granted, he did decide to create it in that fashion. He did decide to put the cap of Malchus on top of it. On top of, so to say, as a cover-up of over Shem Havaya, or the other 9 spheres, but namely the energy of all the 9 spheres beyond Malchus is the Shem Havaya. And he wanted to cover it up. And he did cover it up in order there should be the production of Eilam, for the reason he gave last week, because Reiv Am Hadras Melech, which is a nation which doesn't carry that same spirit as the inner circle of the king. Gechalim Aimemes, the spirit of the king is extinguished by them. And that is the creation of Zman and Mokim, and in the entire Eilam, time, place, and an Eilam which is Melashon Hela B'Hester, famous Gemara, which covers up the reality of the Emes Hashem. For this very reason that Hashem wanted it to be so, to have a dira b'tachtainim, means to have a dwelling place, and then abode, a damasol, in this very tachtainim, in a world which denies the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that denial can only come because there was the cap of Malchus or Adnas, which again with the energy of Gvura, as we explained. So there was a master plan, but the point of the tzaddikim or Torah, if it was the Kriyas Yamsa, for example, and you say, wow, water, time, and it's locked into that definition, water, you can't have over 2 million people walking through a Yamsuf. It's impossible. Water halts the person that he can't go. If he doesn't have any travel on the water, that's it, you're done. And Pari is behind you, and yeah, the results were catastrophic, and they could have been so. If Zman and Mokim were real, and there was a dissonance between Malchus and Har and the Malchus, that's it. Can't go further, because there's water. What is the Isis and Meipsim Shabbatera? What do? They just show you, yeah, it looks like water, but Hashem Elikim, it's all part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem is not limited, nor is the time and place really locked into being time and place. And I'll show you the water, this space will split into 10 channels or 10 openings, 12 openings, and all the Shvatim will go through. And so to all the Meisim, yeah, it looks like water, but I can show you it's blood. Don't make such a big deal of the fact, don't lock it into water. Or the story of Chanina Mendesa, when he had, that they didn't have oil, so they had vinegar. He says, whoever's going to tell whoever says the oil should burn, he could say that the vinegar should burn. Vinegar doesn't usually light. Can't ignite vinegar. It's oil that burns, not vinegar. But yeah, that's what it is. As a result, the production of Malchus, that's what it is. But Hashem Hu Elikim, and Hashem could decide at that point, B'chaninu and Deisa, the vinegar lit. Or the story of the Baal Shem Tov, the icicles were lighting. Were the icicles, they lit the icicles because they didn't find any wood. So on the surface, yeah, icicles you can't light an icicle. On the surface, wood is what burns, not icicles. But don't lock it in, because the whole phenomenon of icicles and wood and the entire Olam, which is a combination of time as Zman and Mokim, are really one with the energy of Shem Hashem, from Hashem's perspective. And we have to know, yeah, there's a plan over here. Hashem wanted it to be so because of the master plan, but don't lock it in that it ought to be exactly like that. Which again, I'm mentioning just a few miracles, but that's the story, and this is the Hashgacha Pratis, which we see, if we're only honest with ourselves, every individual, each one of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we constantly are able to see Hashem's hand in everything, and not to say it meant to be like that, or it looks that's the way it's going to unfold. Yeah, that's maybe the way Zman and Mokim is presenting it, but then we know that Hashem Hu Elikim, and therefore it's not to be locked in, and so many times Hashem shows you that it's not locked in, and He opens a window within the time and place and fuses the two. The time and place carry that message of beyond time and beyond place, which is so many Hashgacha Pratis and divine providence, which we see as individuals, but collectively, Am Yisrael as a whole, over 3,000 years. So many different periods of our history when Hashem opened that window and showed you it's not locked in, because Hashem Hu Elikim. And therefore the whole Zman and Mokim is completely stands in a total nullification to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as he says, Kibit Leira Shemesh B'Shemesh, like the ray of the sun within the ball of the sun. And you can see this idea in chapter 3. We'll stop over here. Then the ray within the sun, not going to repeat the whole thing, even though what we appreciate the ray is when the after the end of the ball of the sun, then the actual ray begins to express itself or present itself. But that same ray, if it's out of the sun, for sure, right? Make a calculation. If it's out of the sun and has that brightness, for sure, it's within the ball of the sun. But within the ball of the sun, there is no ray. You only have the ball of the sun. It's completely bottled. There's nothing. Any way you'll swing it, you will never find the ray within the ball of the sun. Conceptually, it's there because it's able to perform out of the ball of the sun. For sure, it's able to perform within the ball of the sun. But within the ball of the sun, you only have the ball of the sun because it's completely bottled. It completely stands in a full sense of nullification. And so too, time and place, because of Hashem Elikim, really don't have that, so to say, that real makeup in a way that it has to be like that. No, it stands in not only periodically Hashem opens the window. When he opens the window, he gives us the opportunity to see it. But what he's really showing us is what it is by default all the time. Hashem Elokim Zman and Mokim is completely one with the this which is transcendent of time and place, and it stands with a total nullification, like the nullification of the ray of the sun when it's in the sun.